Hey everyone, Future here, and welcome to this video demystifying MIDI for guitar players. Now, if there's one thing I see a lot on forums and on Facebook, it's guitar players being completely mystified by the concept of MIDI. So I figured I would make this video to hopefully help you get started with MIDI in guitar pedals. Now, because there's a wild variety of controllers and software and pedals, there's one sentence you are going to hear a whole lot in the course of this video, and that is read the manual. And that's no joke. If you want to get into this stuff, you are going to have to read manuals. But don't worry, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And I will definitely try to show you a little example of how to read a manual. So let's first start off. Why would you want MIDI in guitar pedals? Well, there's a plethora of reasons for this. And one of the most common things is that MIDI can be really useful for switching presets in pedals, for instance, or controlling parameters in pedals. So as a demonstrational tool, I have the Empress Effects Zoya here, which is a powerhouse pedal with very tight MIDI integration. So this is definitely not a standard example, but it does give me some abilities to show you some stuff in a more visible way. On the screen you'll see Reaper, and this is the DAW I chose because it's free and it's what I generally use. If you have any questions about how to set up MIDI in your DAW, I'm going to say read the manual or Google it. I will also demonstrate it with a synth as a controller just to show you how to set that up, but for the time being let's focus on this first and then we get into the slightly more advanced stuff. So let's start off. What do you need to get this thing going? Now for this setup, I'm using my computer to control things, and this would be a pretty standard setup if, for instance, you have a bend that plays along with a click. You can have the presets being switched by your computer on the click, so you don't have to walk to your pedal board. Quite convenient. For this we are using a interface which has a MIDI connection. In this case it's a Persona 68C. And MIDI is provided through a data port on the back with one of these handy little adapter thingies. And this is the MIDI out, because we're sending MIDI out of the computer into the pedal. So on the pedal side, we have the MIDI in connected. And this is a altogether way too long cable. When dealing with MIDI, use the shortest possible cable you can, because MIDI is very sensitive to data loss. This just happens to be the shortest cable I have lying around. So that's your basic setup. MIDI out from whatever is sending the MIDI into MIDI in from your pedal. Now, when dealing with MIDI, there are three basic MIDI commands you have to keep in mind. There is a note value MIDI, there is a program change, and program change is usually used for changing presets, for instance on a synthesizer or a pedal, and there is CC. Control change, and this is to control parameters of synthesizers, for instance, or parameters on pedals. Now the most visual demonstration has to do with program change, so that's where we're going to start. What you want to do in your software is you want to set up a track and you want to make sure you have some way to send MIDI out. In the case of Reaper, this is a MIDI item. You can simply select a range. So I selected 0 to 5, 4 bars, insert new MIDI item, and you will have a MIDI item. We need to tell the DAW to send this MIDI out, so we go to the routing and we tell it to send hardware out to the output of the interface. This is where we run into our first little hurdle. So any MIDI port, any standard 5-pin DIN MIDI port supports up to 16 channels of MIDI being sent at any time. Sent or received, of course. It's a two-way thing. Now, the reason to use multiple channels is because you might have to connect several devices and you don't want device 2 processing the MIDI of device 1. In our example, we're just dealing with one device, so we're just going to keep it simple and we're going to set it to channel 1. Now, any MIDI we send out will be sent on channel 1 to whatever is listening. Because MIDI isn't targeted, it just sends a signal through the cable and whatever is connected will receive it. And whether or not it will do something, well, that's going to depend on that device. I just happen to know that the Zoya listens to channel 1, and that's where the manual comes in. So let's take a quick look at the Zoya manual, shall we? Now this is not really riveting stuff, but it is important. Basically any pedal with MIDI will have a MIDI section in the manual. If it doesn't, it's a lousy manufacturer and you shouldn't buy their pedals. This is information you simply need. In the case of Chase Bliss, they provide actual cheat sheets for MIDI, which is really nice, but we're going to have to deal with this. If you scroll down a little bit, we will see load a patch via MIDI, program change messages. Alright, so if we want to change the patch, we need to send a change program message. It's behind the camera. There we go. So you can activate the patch by sending a MIDI program change message on the MIDI channel selected in the configuration menu. Send a number that corresponds to the patch. Keep in mind that Zoya patches begin at number 0. So let's do that. In Reaper, if you double click a MIDI item, you will get into the MIDI editor. And all the way down here, and I will make it a little bigger if I can, you can select a little thing called program. This is going to depend from DAW to DAW, and I'm really only versed in Reaper, so if you're using any other DAW, look up how to send program changes in insert DAW here. In Reaper you can just double click and it will create a little line. And we can now set the height. It will tell you the value here in this little box. So let's drag it all the way down. Let's create another point here. Just double click. 6 is fine. Let's double click. 22. And let's double click. 65. All right. So now if we play this back, you will see that on the screen of the Zoya, the program is going to change. Patch 0. Patch 6, patch 22, patch 56. And if we play it again, it jumps back to 0, 6, 22, 56. And that's how easy it is to send MIDI to the Zoya, which makes it an excellent candidate for demonstration. Now, if you're using a Chase Bliss, I'm pretty sure they have something about that in the manual as well. So let's take a quick look. So it says here, presets are both saved and recalled using program change messages. To save a preset, send a program change message while holding down both the tab and bypass stomp switches. Sending a program change message of 45, for example, will save the current preset to 45. There are 122 total slots. And that's a small thing to note here, and this goes for the Zoya as well. If we turn the Zoya all the way to the end, you'll see 63 preset slots. If I were to put this outside the range of the Zoya, so for instance to 114, and I play it back, it will actually not understand what is going on. So it will go to 6, it will go to 22, it will go to 56. But then if I start it again, it will simply not register this because it's out of range. If I move this down to 63, there we go. So that's something, if you are running into the issue of it not switching, you're likely out of the range of this specific pedal. Again, read the manual to find out what the parameters are you can send to your pedal. So that's program changes. So let's talk a little bit about CC. Now for this, we are going to make a little patch on the Zoya. And I'm just going to add a interface MIDI CC in. All right. Now CC works a little bit differently. You have a MIDI channel. Once again, we're leaving this at 1, and you have on the Zoya, it's a controller because you can actually set these things. On many pedals, this is predefined. In the Chase Bliss, for instance, if you want to change the volume, you need to send to CC 14. Any MIDI can be 128 values, so the values can be 0 to 127, 127 being the highest value, so in this case the highest volume. And if you're trying to change the scan, you need to send a MIDI CC 19. Again, if you want a low value, send a 0. If you want a high value, 127. So let's put that into practice. Once again, we're in the MIDI editor and we can choose the CCs, which are down here, starting at 0. And the highest CC we can send is 119, because basically every pedal will be within that range. So this controller is set to 0. So let's see if we can actually make that work. We select 0. We are going to send a high signal. Let's make it low. Let's make it medium. And just add something. Doesn't really matter in this case, because we're not trying to accomplish anything. For the sake of demonstration. There we go. So you can now see that the light is changing intensity depending on how high the signal is we're sending. So with a high signal it will be bright, and with a low signal it will be off or very dim. If we want to send multiple MIDI CCs, we need to have something to receive it. So let's put this on CC 1. We can go to CC 1 and we can draw something in. For instance, this. And now if we play it back, you can create a fun little show with the lights on the Zoya. Now, of course, normally you would use this to change parameters, like it says in the manual for instance, the habit. If I wanted to change something, I would have to select this channel. So for instance, if I want to change the volume, I would have to select 14 here and send that out. Now you might notice in Reaper there's a bunch of words next to the CCs. These are kind of the standard designations that most manufacturers use with synthesizers. You can just completely disregard the words next to it. It doesn't matter. Only the number matters and the value you set. So that's basically sending CC to a pedal from your computer. It's really nothing more than this. It's not any more complicated than this. Now it becomes a little bit more complicated once you have several pedals, of course. That's where the tricky bits come in. If you have several pedals and you want to connect them all and you want to control them all, it becomes a little bit more complicated. If you want to connect several pedals and control them independently from each other, you're going to need those channels. And most manufacturers, once again, will cover this in the manual. For instance, with the Chase Bliss, it says here in the top, habit is set to MIDI channel 2 by default, but it's easy to change. Simply hold down both stomp switches when you power on the pedal. The pedal is now looking for the first program change message it sees and will set itself to that channel. So let's say you have two Zoyas and you want one listening to channel 1 and one listening to channel 2. You would have to go into the menu. And in the menu is a little thing that says MIDI channel. I'm not sure if that's readable, but it says 1 right now. So that's MIDI channel 1. On the habit, you would have to do the little trick here with the stomp switches. Set your MIDI channel that you prefer and then send out any program change over that MIDI channel, and the pedal will adapt that MIDI channel. When connecting several MIDI devices, if you only have one output port, you can connect up to 16 devices with individual messaging. In this case, you would need a through box or a MIDI splitter, but the more usual term is a through box. This allows you to basically take one MIDI cable and split it into several. The simpler versions of through boxes will send out all channels over all cables you connect. So the only way to address a specific pedal is by setting that pedal to listen to just one specific channel. And that's basically MIDI. It's both very simple and kind of tricky to work with if you're not all that used to it. But that's the demonstration part from the computer. So let's get in a external controller and let's do a little controller demonstration, because if you're using a keyboard setup or a setup without a laptop, you are probably going to use a MIDI pedal board to do this sort of thing, and you're not going to be using a computer. So let's take a look at that. All right, so preemptive apologies for the kind of cluttered screen and mayhem going on, but we're going to get a little bit more in depth in this part because there's no way around it. What we're going to do now is control our pedal, so still the Empress Effect Zoya, with a synthesizer, the Korg Op6, because I don't have a pacer or something, so this is just going to have to do. And the nice thing is most synthesizers actually do send out MIDI, so that's very convenient. Now, to find out what is sent by your synthesizer, in most cases you can just look in the software of a set synthesizer. So for instance with Arturia, they have that handy little MIDI center thing, MIDI controller center. Korg has a controller thing where you can change the CCs and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes you simply don't know what your synth is sending out and you want to find out. So that's sort of the first part of this little journey. And for this, I'm going to introduce you to a little tool called MIDIOX. And MIDIOX is pretty convenient because it allows you to quickly troubleshoot things. So we're going to hide this. And let's see if we can actually scale this down a tiny bit, because this is quite mad. And there we go. So in this example, we don't have the tools to change our MIDI on the controller side, and we don't know what MIDI is being sent out by the controller. So for this to work out, what we need to do is we need to take the MIDI out of the controller and connect it to the MIDI in of a computer. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to connect it to the MIDI in of my computer. Now we can download and open MIDIOX. And in MIDIOX you can select the MIDI devices to open and make sure that your computer is on the MIDI in. Press OK. And now if we move any control here, you will see stuff happening on the screen. And it doesn't matter what I move. I can move sliders, I can move knobs. Anything I move will do something on the screen. So let's quickly go over how to read this. The last message says it's a control change being sent out if I play one of the keys. This is in view. You will see note on off. And this is control change. And this is modulation. And here we have pitch bend. But we're interested in this knob here. So we can read this from left to right. Timestamp doesn't matter. In doesn't really matter. What is interesting is the channel. So apparently this synthesizer is sending out on channel 2. The data is the level that's being sent out. So it should be 0 right now. This is all hexadecimal. So yeah, 0. If we push it all the way up, it will be 7F. And the next thing that's interesting is right here, and that's data 1. And this is your CC number. When I turn this knob, which I want to map, you will see it's a 6C, and of course a number can't have a letter in it. So for this we would need a hexadecimal converter. For instance, we can just use this website here, Rapid Tables, and it has a hexadecimal converter, so we can say a 6C, and that's decimal number 108. If we take a look at the knob right next to it, this one, that's 6D. 6D is for decimal number 109. And this way you can reverse engineer what knob is going where. Of course, this is quite a big task to undertake, but if you really have no idea and no software, no other tools, this is basically the way to reverse engineer how your keyboard is or your controller is sending out the MIDI. Now, in order to use this, we need to go back to our little Zoya. Hello, Zoya. And we had these little lights here. So now we know that if we send on MIDI channel 2, so we need to make sure the channel is set to 2. And we need to make sure that the control message is 108. And the other one, channel 2, control message 109. Now when I turn these knobs, and I actually connect the MIDI cable back up to the pedal, of course. That's kind of a big deal. There we go. We can turn on the lights. Let me actually turn off this light using the knobs on the controller. Now, of course, the Zoya has the luxury of being able to reprogram the control message you want to receive with a lot of pedals, like, for instance, Chase Bliss. This is all predefined, so you would have to find out how to change the CC being sent by your controller, or if that's not possible at all, which is unlikely, once again, check out the manual. But if you really can't change the messages being sent by your controller, yeah, buy a new controller would be the best advice, or get like a MIDI filter or a programmable box, like for instance a Boom box or a programmable filter box. Now these things are not cheap, and that's basically why I said buy a new controller, because you're probably off cheaper and way more flexible. But that's how you can control MIDI on your pedal from a controller. And also with the side step of figuring out what your controller is actually sending out, which can also be very useful for troubleshooting. If you're having any trouble with MIDI sending to your pedal, connect it to your PC, get something like MIDI aux. It looks very antiquated, but it's actually an extremely useful tool, because whenever you are doing things here and nothing's happening on your pedal, you can sanity check yourself by connecting the controller to your PC. Let me just quickly switch that. There we go. And now we can sanity check. Yeah, there is indeed MIDI being sent. We can check, is it being sent on the right channel? Is it being sent to the right number? And that way we have a pretty surefire way to make sure this side of the thing is working. And then we can focus our efforts on the pedal side of the thing to make sure with the manual, are we actually sending to the right channel? Are we actually sending to the right commands? And that way you can start figuring this stuff out. And that's actually where I want to end this video, because it's already quite a long video. We covered quite a few topics. Now, I am somewhat tempted to expand this to a video also explaining how to do MIDI through and doing a thing with multiple receiving pedals. Or multiple receiving devices. The only problem is I only have one MIDI-enabled pedal, which is the Empress. So that's challenging at best. But if that's something people are interested in, well, maybe I can figure something out and we can talk a little bit about that. But that's not for this video at least. I'm just going to end it here. If there are any questions, again, if it's very DAW specific or pedal specific, read the manual, because that's basically the only thing I can do. Read the manual and yeah, use tools like MIDI aux to troubleshoot your situation. But other questions, always welcome to drop them down below and maybe have an opinion about it. That's it for this video. I was going to say have a safe journey, but that's weird. Is it? I don't know what. Have a safe journey.